Hope it sounds okay. That's the theme for book lunch, which I think I probably wrote before we even started doing book lunches. And welcome to Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I'm MitchHampton, your host. And we're continuing with my what promises to be a mini series on John Updike, the Rabbit novels. So this is episode 2. In the first episode, I tried to get a little sense, a feeling of John Updike, the man, as well as the times. Now, I should say a few words about times because the novels. John Updike was one of those. Well, I'll say two things about him. He was quite prolific, and this second thing I'm going to say about him normally doesn't go along with the kind of prodigious output. One of the best writers of the whole 20th century. So he's that good. He's worthy of our attention, but also wrote a lot. So in addition, of course, he wrote these novels, but he wrote many, many, many short stories. He wrote political books like The Coup, a historical novel about James Buchanan, with whom he was obsessed, president, and it was also a play and short stories, a New Yorker magazine. But we're going to dive. The second episode, we're going to get deeper into. After all, he's a writer, and writing is all about prose, and the soul of the syntax, his syntax, will come through hopefully. So, Rabbit is a series that starts in the 50s and ends up the very last work is from the 2000s, Rabbit Remembered. What is it, 04? So that gives you a sense of the panoramic view of that era. And you can look at it different ways. You can look at it in terms of John Updike is this unique writer, his prose style, but you can also look at it outside of the realm of fiction or imagination per se, and look at it as a document of those years. And actually, the more rereading all these books, which I'm going through them again. It occurs to me, I'm 57. When I look back on these books, it occurs to me that he's so, I want to say, I guess the word would be very naturalistic in his faithfulness to capturing something of all those years, the post-war years. There's things in each of these novels that I recognize as reigning true, as they would say, as being accurate, even given the limitation of Updike's point of view. I mean, this is one person, and he has his limitations, as do we all. But even given all of that, the capaciousness is remarkable of the way he looks at things. So I'm going to go back to Rabbit Run. Now, we last Rabbit Run. His wife Janice accidentally drowns their baby. He has long conversations about faith and theology and other matters with Reverend Eccles. There's a sense in which he wrote this novel, Rabbit Run, as a response to Jack Kerouac's On the Road. I don't know if it's an anti On the Road, but it's a little bit of a kind of his view of an unreliable 1970s male anti-hero with many flaws and many warts, but nevertheless worthy of our attention, indeed, maybe our concern. And I'm going to dive into this novel. I'm going to dive into a couple, because of these two matters, the way they interact, the matter of the story of the novel, the plot, the incidents, and then the matter of, hello Yvette, it's great to people coming into the stream. let's see, the plot, the incidents, but then there's the matter of the trying to choose my words carefully. I want to say ornate, it's not just free and direct style. Free and direct style is when there's kind of this hovering quality, you know, when prose is sort of, it's not an omniscient narrator and yet it's the character but not the character, and this kind of issue. It's when Updike goes off on, I want to say, these solos, like an improvised jazz solo and these riffs. And it's the interaction of coming out of, especially above all, two writers, James Joyce and Henry James, carrying the interior of the soul, the interiority of a human being, as far as he can through language on the page, while still having a dramatic narrative. And it's the interaction of these two things which is most interesting. I mean, I think he goes as, as a writer, he went as far as a writer could go in pushing, you know, so there's two documents. There's documents of the times of the US in those years, but it's also a document of what we could call the self or certain selves, without any censorship and without any hesitations or no coyness, but with a beautiful language. And so it's bringing all these things together. So I'm just gonna open up here. And I'm gonna read the scene in which Janice loses or accidentally kills her baby, a part of the scene, because it's a good illustration of Janice being the rabbit, Harry Angston's wife, who has a drinking problem. And but I try to find here where I am. Get out my glasses. Because we're at the end of Rabbit Run, and so the accidental drowning of the baby, and then there's a funeral scene. And I'm just trying to get a sense of the principle that I talk about of style and form being paramount. These being paramount. That, you know, you have the story of this troubled young man and his not a great marriage to his wife, and in the 50s and all that goes along with that. But then there's the question of how a writer, in this case John Updike, is going to treat the story. He has to treat it. You can have the story, but there's a million ways he could have written this. In fact, I can imagine in my mind's eye other writers doing different things with this same story. So this is a dramatic scene here, a difficult scene. I thought it'd be good to find it. Where are we here? Let's go here. Now, in these interior, I want to call them interior landscapes of human beings. I'll just give a taste up front. So, she's drinking and she's tired and she's in a difficult state. This is Janice. Of course she's alone because our anti-hero is running all around town and running away and not being responsible. Daddy will be home. Start from the beginning of the paragraph. Worry has stretched his head high. Well, there's also Nelson too. So there's the two kids. The older kid is Nelson. So I'm trying to find here. She's saying to Nelson, Daddy went out to work early this morning before you got up. He'll be home for supper like he always is. Child frowns at her and then parrots with sharp hope, like always is. It's quotes. And then here's a passage, one of the passages of Janice. This is, of course, Janice's point of view, not a man's point of view and not Harry's point of view. So let's look into this. Worry has stretched his head high, so his neck seems a stem too thin to support the ball of his skull with its broad whirl of pillow-mussed hair. Daddy will be home, she repeats. Daddy will be home. She's repeating to herself Having taken on herself the burden of lying, she needs a little more whiskey for support. There is a murk inside her which she must tint a bright color or collapse. She takes the dishes out to the kitchen, but they slide so in her hands she doesn't try to wash them. She thinks she must change out of her bathrobe into a dress, but in taking the steps into the bedroom forgets her purpose and begins making the bed. But something whose presence she feels on the wrinkled bed frightens her, so that she draws back and goes into the other room to be with the children. It's as if in telling them Harry would be back as normal, she's put a ghost in the apartment. But the other person does not feel like Harry. It feels like a burglar, a teasing burglar, dancing from room to room ahead of her. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because this is a long scene. Let's see. A few pages she has exchanged with Nelson, son. Let's see the baby. Okay, so I'm going to go to the, you might say, the most violent and most difficult part of the one of in this novel. Rebecca's the name of the baby. Rebecca's screaming. Janice takes the glass with her and spills it on the rug with her knee while she strips the baby of its nightie and sweater. She carries the sopping clothes to the television set and puts them on top while she drops to her knees and tries to stuff the crayons back into their box. Her head aches with all this jarring up and down. She takes the crayons to the kitchen table and dumps the uneaten bacon and lettuce into the paper bag under the sink, but the mouth of the bag leans partly closed, and the lettuce falls behind into the darkness and back of the can, and she crouches down with her head pounding to try to see it or get it with her fingers and is unable. Her knees sting from so much kneeling. She gives up and to her surprise sits flatly on a kitchen chair and looks at the gaudy soft noses of the crayons poking out of the Crayola box. Hide the whiskey. Her body doesn't move for a second, but when it does, she sees her hands with the little lines of dirt on her fingernails put the whiskey bottle into the lower cabinet with some old shirts of Harry's she was saving for Rags. He would never wear a mended shirt, not that she was any good at mending them. So it goes on in a here. In the living room, Rebecca's lying naked in the fuzzy armchair with her belly puffing out sideways to yell and her lumpy curved legs clenched and red. Janice's other baby was a boy, and it still seems unnatural to her. Between the girl's legs, these two little buns of fat instead of a boy's triple business. When the doctor had Nelson circumcised, Harry hadn't wanted him to. He hadn't been and thought it was unnatural. She had laughed at him. He was so mad. So you can see here that's an aside to him, to remembering, this thing. The baby's face goes red with each squall, and Janice closes her eyes and thinks how really horrible it is of mother to come and ruin her day just to make sure she's lost Harry again. She tips too much trying to dig the tiny rubbery thing out of the chair, so drops to her knees and scoops Rebecca into her arms and carries her into the bathroom, held sideways against her breasts. She is proud to be carrying this to completion. At least the baby will be clean when mother comes. So she's concerned that Janice's mother's going to be visiting her. She wants her baby to be clean, Becca to be clean. It's important to her. She drops gently to her knees by the big calm tub and does not expect her sleeves to be soaked. The water wraps around her forearms like two large hands. Under her eyes, the pink baby sinks down like a gray stone. With a sob of protest, she grapples for the child, but the water pushes up at her hands. Her bathrobe tends to float, and the slippery thing squirms in the sudden opacity. She has a hold, feels a heartbeat on her thumb, and then loses it, and the skin of the water leaps with the pale refracted oblongs that she can't seize the solid of. It is only a moment, but a moment dragged out in thicker time. Then she has Becky squeezed in her hands, and it is all right. She lifts the living thing into air and hugs it against her sobbing chest. Water pours off them onto the bathroom tiles. The little weightless body flops against her neck, and a quick look of relief at the baby's face gives a fantastic clotted impression. A contorted memory of how they give artificial respiration pumps Janice's cold, wet arms in frantic rhythmic hugs. Under her clenched lids, great scarlet prayers arise, wordless, monotonous, and she seems to be clasping the knees of a vast third person whose name, Father, beats against her head like physical blows. Though her wild heart bathes the universe in red, no spark kindles in the space between her arms. For all of her pouring prayers, she doesn't feel the faintest tremor of an answer in the darkness against her. Her sense of the third person with them widens enormously, and she knows, while knocks sound at the door, that the worst thing that has ever happened to any woman in the world has happened to her. So that's a fairly most difficult scene in. But I'm when I first read that, it was a young teenager. What was I? Maybe I was 12, 11 possibly. I don't know. And then the next chapter he immediately goes to Janet Engstrom has accidentally drowned their baby. Jack comes. How could she? I'm afraid she was drowned. So he jumps to this very dialogue scene, giving you kind of a more, I would say, external or exterior account of what I just read to you, right? And that's the tension, because we just got through, I just got through reading this long passage with frantic hugs and prayers and voices, and it feels like there's a ghost in the room, and there's she's trying to wash this baby, and she's worried about her mother and what will her mother think. And it's kind of, I think for Updike, that passage I just read is more or less how all of us experience reality, even if we're nothing like this person, even if we don't have a baby, and even if we're totally sober. And what I mean by that is that the density of information and the sensations and textures of living in a moment, this present moment, like right now, me doing this stream, even though inside all of those moments there are facts of great importance, the fact that one has a baby, the fact that a baby's being harmed, the fact that, whatever else you might want to say, you live in this particular part of Pennsylvania, and even the facts of what a person is doing, that there's, I think for Updike, something more, and the primacy of internal experience of life. That's why it says a passage in here, remember, where it says, there's as much passive as active voice here. Her body doesn't move for a second, but when it does, she sees her hands with little lines of dirt in her fingernails. So she's doing things. And again, it's what I said, that Harry, remember I said, Harry feels, Harry seems. It's constant leitmotif in all these novels of Updike is it feels, it appears, I want. This kind of subject verb. And what's being revealed is this jumble of wild experience. And at the same time, it's a scene of a woman who discovers that her baby has drowned in the bathtub. So you could put it like that, which is what happens. But what does Updike gain, or what do we gain as readers with it being delivered in this way, in this language? And there's a funeral scene. And when you know it, because it's called Rabbit Run, in the funeral, what does Harry do? He gets defensive. He says, don't look at me. He says, don't look at me. He says, I didn't kill her. This comes out of his mouth clearly, in tune with the simplicity he feels now in everything. Heads talking softly snap around in a voice so sudden and cruel. So Harry's being cruel. Sudden and cruel is an authorial description or adjectives here. They misunderstand. He just wants to set this straight. He explains, you all keep acting as if I did it. I wasn't anywhere near. She's the one. He turns to her, and her face, slack as if slapped. Slack as if slapped, that phrase. Seems hopelessly removed from him. Hey, it's okay, he tells her. You didn't mean to. He tries to take her hand, but she snatches it back like from a trap and looks toward her parents, who step toward her. His face burns. His embarrassment is savage. Forgiveness had been big in his heart, and now it's hate. He hates his wife's face. She doesn't see. See's italicized. She had a chance to join him in truth, just the simplest factual truth, and she turned away. And of course, what does he do? He runs. He flees. Uphill exultantly, he dodges among gravestones. Dandelions grow bright as butter among the graves. Behind him, his name is called in Eccles. Remember Reverend Eccles' voice? Harry, Harry. You're like, where are you going? He feels Eccles chasing him, but does not turn to look. And so there's all these pages at the end of the book describing Harry's run. Look at that. Things he goes by as he's running. You know? He actually tries to reconnect with his old girlfriend, Ruth, and she's very mad at him, doesn't want anything to do with him. That's where his destination after running. And she says, it's really bad. You're bad with me. You're bad with everyone. I don't want to. And it turns out Ruth is pregnant. So she's going to have a kid later on, novels that's his. So, I had to leave you, Ruth, because of Janice, my wife. I had to go to my wife. And then he runs, goes to see Ruth. He runs from her. He runs. And there's an interesting, and while he's running, Updike writes this. Updike writes, there is light, though, in the street lights. Muffled by trees, their mingling cones retreat to the unseen end of Summer Street. Nearby to his left, directly under one, the rough asphalt looks like dimpled snow. He decides to walk around the block to clear his head and pick his path. Funny how what makes you move is so simple, and the field you must move in is so crowded. His legs take strength from the distinction, scissor along evenly. Goodness lies inside. There is nothing outside. Those things he was trying to balance have no weight. He feels his inside is very real suddenly, a pure blank space in the middle of a dense net. I don't know. That's italicized. I don't know, he kept telling Ruth. He doesn't know what to do, where to go, what will happen. The thought that he doesn't know seems to make him infinitely small and impossible to capture. And this is how the novel ends with these paragraphs. It ends with, he runs, he runs. So he's, like the title of this novel, he's running. And then, of course, you have 10 years. The 60s passes. In 1969, 1970, we have Rabbit Redux. And of course, life goes on, Janice's life goes on, and in the second novel, Rabbit has kind of a working class job as a linotypist, linotype factory. And there's a stuff like this. This is one of the chapter titles, Pop, Mom, Moon, referring to the moon landing. So he's bringing in things from the era, things that are happening as he was writing the novel. So this Rabbit one was an explosive book, as you can see from its nature of its subject and its plot. And it was an announcement, Updike's announcement to the world that he's going to write about possibly not always sympathetic people in situations that are difficult in the most poetic, loving way that he can in prose. That's actually his project. And why have a project like that? Well, it's a choice. You're with these characters through all these four novels. Let's cut to the 60s because, or it's actually 1970, 71. And a less dramatic scene. There's a scene where he meets these musicians. He meets, I think it's Babe is her name. And he's in a piano bar. And Babe is the pianist. And that's how he meets Skeeter, the revolutionary, the African-American revolutionary, and his sometime girlfriend, Jill. And as I said, he forms a commune with them. He just puts them up in this place while he's separated from Janice. Janice, of course, is having an affair. Now it's Janice's turn to have the affair with this Greek Stavros, this Greek restaurant person. I'm trying to find this bar scene here. Yeah, Jill. Now that was a passage in Rabbit Run of a big dramatic moment in a novel, climax novel, tragic moment, with all of the abstractness of Updike's language. It's not so abstract that you don't know what's going on, but it's abstract enough that it's removing you from moving us as readers from the normal, ordinary world of good and bad and decision making. He wants to suspend ordinary judgment. He wants you to pay attention to people that aren't always likable. And he even puts in things that are characters' feelings that may be entirely untrue. And maybe, after all, our hero yells at his wife at a funeral and saying, "You did it," but I don't blame you. But after all, he's a man who just ran off for no apparent reason at all, and just ran off and left his wife and kid to go on some adventure with a woman named Ruth and heaven knows what else. And so it's kind of Updike he's a literary artist, and literary artists are not interested in telling us how to live, but they are interested in trying to be completely faithful to what it feels like to be alive and feels like to live anything that might happen. So I'm going to cut to this kind of more crowd sequence, this bar. And so Babe's the pianist, and it's a jazz bar, and it says here, "What does Babe play? All the good old ones, all show tunes. Up a lazy river, you're the top, thou swell, summertime, there are hundreds, thousands. Men from Indiana wrote them in Manhattan. They flow into each other without edges, flowing under black bridges of chords, thumped 6, 7 times, as if Babe is helping the piano to remember a word it won't say." So, he's describing a woman playing the piano in a bar. playing these old standards. And instead of, saying it the way I just said it there, he says, Babe is helping the piano to remember a word it won't say, or spanking the silence, or saying, here I am, find me, find me. And that's italicized there. So that's Babe's internal. So what I'm saying is Updike does this is what Updike does. He's gonna keep doing that in everything he writes. Just he won't he's not he's fearless that way. Right. Here I am, find me, find me. Her hands all brown bone, hang on the keyboard, hushed like gloves on a table. She gazes up through blue dust to get herself into focus. She lets her hands fall into another tune. My Funny Valentine. Smoke gets in your eyes. I can't get started. Starting to hum along with herself now. Lyrics born in some distant smoke. Decades when Americans move within the American dream. Laughing at it. Starving on it. But living it. Humming it. The national anthem anywhere. Wise guys in Hicks. Straw boaters in bib overalls. Fast bucks, broken hearts, penthouses in the sky, shacks by the railroad tracks, ups and downs, rich and poor, trolley cars, and the latest news by radio. Rabbit has come in on the end of it, as the world shrank like an apple going bad, and America was no longer the wisest tick town within the boat ride of Europe, and Broadway forgot the tune. But here it all still was, in the music Babe played, the little stairway she climbed and came tap dancing down, twinkling in black, and there was no other music, not really, though Babe works in some Beatles songs, okay, Yesterday and Hey Jude, doing it rinky-tink, her own style of ice to rattle in the glass. As Babe plays, she takes on swaying and leaning backwards. At her arm's ends, the standards go root back into ragtime. That's a tricky sentence. So, as Babe plays, she takes on swaying and leaning backwards. At her arm's ends, it's her arm's ends, the standards, that means the songs, the standards go root back into ragtime. So and the musician in me is going to take that to mean that she turns these standards into kind of a ragtime style. I don't know. We don't really know. Maybe he just likes the word ragtime. Or maybe it's the reference to ragtime in American culture, or all the above, right? Rabbit sees circus tents and fireworks and farmers' wagons and an empty sandy river running so slow, the sole motion is catfish sleeping beneath the golden skin. The boy leans forward and murmurs to Rabbit, you want ass, right? You can have her. 50 gets you her all night, all ways you can think of. She knows a lot, unquote. So you have this very lyrical passage about music, and then you brought to the characters in this bar, and this guy saying you want this girl, etc. This is the environment we're in. We're no longer, that's his announcement to us, that we are no longer in 1959. We are now in 1971, 72 with that. But Rabbit's distracted by the music. Sunk into music, Rabbit is lost. He shakes his head and says, she's too good. Good, man. She got to live, right? This place don't pay her shit. Babe has become a railroad, prune-head bobbing napkin of jewels flashing blue. Music rolling through crazy places. So there's more passages describing this music. This music, and then it says, that's how Babe plays. Rabbit says, that was beautiful, Babe. It was, says another voice. A small white girl was standing there prim, in a white dress casual and dirty as smoke. Hey, Jill, Buchanan says. Hi, Buck. Skeeter, hi. So Skeeter is his name. He scowls and looks at the cigarette, of which there is not even butt enough to call a roach. So we're meeting these characters that are going to be in this novel. Babe doesn't come into it. Babe's just the piano player, right? But Jill and Skeeter. And I guess the person this guy was talking about, sounding, I guess, like a I guess a pimp of some kind or some kind of manager for sex work. I don't know. Again, in Updike, it's not always clear. I mean, it's clear, but he doesn't, and he doesn't. It's kind of it's just a way of treating narrative that he just wants just the glimmer of the outline of an incident, because I feel what he wants to really do is get into the interiority of people and express that. And it's almost as if the incident is a way to get at that, possibly. So, and that's who, and so he forms this commune. And in Rabbit Run, forming the commune gets him in so much trouble that neighbors literally threaten him. They come and say, "Who are those people you got in your house? I don't like them being here." And what happens? They burn down Rabbit's home. And what happens in Rabbit Redux? Jill, this girl who's barely 19 or 20, dies in the fire. And Skeeter, this, I guess, revolutionary, although it's in the discussion, it's really unclear what his politics are. It's kind of this odd hybrid of different things. And he lives, he escapes. And so that's the big, just like there's the death of a baby in Rabbit Run, and there's a death of this runaway, hippie runaway, and of an arson of this house that they're living in. And there's passages in this novel of them having political discussions and religious discussions that go on quite extensively. And he's still working at the as a linotypist. And Nelson's with him, so it's very, shall we say, a very unusual situation. Almost like a new family or a makeshift family with Harry Angstrom, this Skeeter, and this girl. Trying to find something here. So see this. See what he does here. So since linotype is one of the things, he does these little examples of print all throughout this novel. So, even the dramatic events in the novel, or, always gives you I'm calling it the exterior view. There's the interior view, but there's the exterior view. Exterior view of life. Sentence for possession. 8 local men and 1 woman were given 6-month sentences for possession of marijuana Thursday. That's the exterior view. And in an author like Updike, if he were going to cover that story, he would, the 8 local men and 1 woman, he would have page after page of what's going on in their minds as they were, I don't know, buying pot from their dealer or something. I don't know. It could be anything. It could be what's going on in the mind of an insurance salesman. Or people playing golf, as they will in later novels. Bear with me. So how does Updike treat a purely external fact or thing? How does he weave it into his prose? It's interesting. So he does it this way. Here's an example. 6 o'clock news, period, 6 o'clock news. The pale face caught behind the screen sternly says, unaware that his head, by some imperfection in reception at 26 Vista Crescent, is flattened, and his chin rubbery and long, says, quote, Chicago, 2,500 Illinois National Guardsmen remained on active duty today in the wake of a day of riots staged by members of the extremist faction of the Students for a Democratic Society. Windows were smashed, cars overturned, policemen assaulted by the young militants whose slogan is, unquote, sad, stern pause. The bleached face lifts toward the camera. The chin stretches. The head flattens like an anvil. So again, he can't have the newsman says, he has to say that it's like an anvil and his head stretches, and it's just, he makes it into this stuff. Turns to this whole other phenomenon, right? Bring the war home. Famous slogan of the era. Film cuts of white helmet policemen flailing at nests of arms and legs, of long-haired girls being dragged, of sudden bearded faces shaking fists that want to rocket out through the television screen. Then back to clips of policemen swinging clubs, which seem ballet-like and soothing to Rabbit. Skeeter likes it. Right on, he cries. Hit that crazy dude again. In the commercial break, he turns and explains to Nelson. Nelson's 13 now, I let you know. It's beautiful, wasn't it? Nelson asks, why aren't you protesting the war? Sure as hen has balls they are. What those crackers protesting is they gotta wait 20 years to get their daddy's share of the pie. They want it now. And so there's more political discussion, and Skeeter's somewhat unique take on things. But he says it as, we just seen this awfulness as protest and students getting their head bashed in, all the now cliched images of that era, and Skeeter says it's beautiful. And so it's, we're thrust in with these people. And we're thrust into these people. So, a upper middle class author like John Updike from Pennsylvania is probably not going to be the same account as, say, I don't know, Robert Stone. I know, I'm trying to think of authors that were hippies or that were more involved. But it's an interesting discussion of the advantage of Updike's distance, almost journalistic distance. See, I would say that because Updike's prose is so interested in this kind of interiority in the language, as I've been discussing, because that's so primary for him, that he almost has to be kind of an outsider. It's like it balances. It's like that's the tension. That's the reason why it works. If it were all on the inside, as it were, it wouldn't be as great, I don't think. I mean, that's just my opinion. Like one balances the other. Because he's already committed to the proposition that anything inside the human being is worthy of our attention. Not just worthy of our attention, but making prose art out of it. So that's what he does. Book 3. Here are the books. Which one of these books is not like the other? Right? This is about the 70s. So wouldn't you know it, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, this is the one book that's like this, The Rainbow. And it already is announcing to us that we are going to enter the 1970s with this one. And all of its craziness. And as I've read before on this podcast, the very first line is running out of gas. Rabbit Engstrom thinks as he stands behind the summer dusty windows of the Springer Motors display room watching the traffic go by on Route 111. Traffic somehow thin and scared compared to what it used to be. So he's describing the traffic as scared. Not just that it's thin, but that the traffic is somehow scared. Isn't that interesting? The fucking world is running out of gas is the following language. Somehow scared. I mean, the scene where Janice drowns her baby. I mean, that, you know, I couldn't do it justice, of course, because it's but I tried to read it the best that I could. But you see his project. So where does this project come from? What is this? Other than things I've said, the idea that what's inside counts, that what's inside is important. Well, I don't know. I mean, part of me feels I might have an inkling of it. Here's what Anna Beagley says about Rabbit Run, about the death of this baby in the first book. It says his baby daughter's death resonates not just in Rabbit Run, but also in the other volumes of the tetralogy. And he goes on to say, Janice evolves, recovering, growing in stature and importance. And their son, Nelson, eventually plays an important role as his father's antagonist. And the pregnant Ruth, though she threatens to have an abortion, gives birth to a baby girl, note the symmetry, who decades later will become the object of Rabbit's fitful attention. So, of course, Rabbit, I mean, I haven't, just some spoilers, I don't know. In the third book, well, I won't say now, Rabbit at Rest, but choose my words carefully, the wild lack of abandon in sexual mores and behavior in the books. But Beagley goes on to talk about, from the beginning there were readers who found Rabbit reprehensible and rejected the novel along with its protagonist. Harry Angstrom was a ticket, John Updike wrote, to the America all around me. I would suggest that these novels are a ticket to our present. That the characters, all of them, including Skeeter and Jill and the rest of them, are, even though these books were written 50 years ago, 40 years ago, are not unlike people walking around today, Americans walking around today who live in the world and make things happen and have influence. And so that's a sense in which these are novels. These novels are not just displays of interior consciousness as they are, but they're also telling us why any of it matters or should matter to us, I think. It's almost scientific. I mean, I said earlier, I've noted that Updike was a person of faith as a writer, but there's actually almost a scientific quality to these novels, by which I mean it's sort of a microscope looking at people. And so so even though it can be fanciful, even though the language is imagery, you might find it even romantic or lyrical, the subject is often really, really, to put it mildly, difficult. And microscope looks in, it's microscopic. It's going in to the person with this kind of fearless attitude. It's very different. Updike's very different than many of his colleagues, and certainly writers today, because another way you can treat all of these elements is to make them, you could do them in a Baroque way. You can do them in a hyper, much, much more comic. There's all kinds of ways you can treat these same stories. You don't have to treat it in the same kind of serious. Updike's approach is there's always a little bit of reverence in it, and that's part of the style, and you have to be on board for that, But there's a lot of different ways you can write about the same. The person crosses the room. I play the piano. Ways you can do it, and so I had some images here. I'm going to show you. Bear with me here. So these are, this is a photo of Updike at his study, writing. Looking out the window. It's probably, I'm guessing early 70s, I don't know. Some other photos like that here. And of course, this is the one that image that comes with our. I mean, these are things that publicity, PR people, and agents and publishers and agents, photographers create to depict people. And we look at them and we can wonder what's in the mind of the person, And a little bit about what Updike does in these novels is to let us inside on what the person's thinking or what it might be. And that, of course, is something that all art does. Little sneak preview. I already gave you a sneak preview of Rabbit is Rich, which we'll get to in due course. There's a lot of stuff going on with the podcast. We're Christmas and Hanukkah have been with us, and a new year is upon us next week. And I'm gonna I think it's the 3rd, right? I'm gonna do a little stream about the very subject of time passing in art, the best that I can, and on such an abstract concept and topic. And I want to thank people for coming and watching this. That's on the 3rd. Yeah, it's on the 3rd. That's right. So join us for that. It'll involve some music. It'll involve some images and maybe even text and reading. I don't know. But it's good to revisit these novels and to have been so fortunate to have someone like John Updike, and there were others, of course, who were unafraid to look at us through the microscope. Thank you, Yvette. Thank you, Peter. Look at us through the microscope, and above all, through this thing we call prose. What is prose? Prose is a very particular thing. It's not just writing. To do things like what he did with that account of this woman and her baby and this funeral, in this bar, this woman playing these standards at the bar, in the piano bar. That's, I never want to live in a world, yeah, that's true. I never want to live in a world in which people aren't doing that, and that aren't utilizing that kind of art form to do that, because it gets us closer to a way of feeling and experiencing life that's not merely a category or a label, or merely the map, and not routinized, It enables that, and prose like this is the only kind of thing that can really do that. And so it's a real actually it's a privilege to spend all the time with these books again. And remember how you felt when I first read them, 40 years ago. Yeah, it would have been 40 years ago, 35 years ago, and here we are in 2024. And I said, these characters are kind of like people today, not that different maybe. In other ways, profoundly different, but they are us. And if we're going to look at us, we should probably do so probably with a little bit of care and attention, just a little bit, and put our maps away and our diagrams away, and get in touch with the indescribable texture of life as it is felt and as we experience it, which is the trick of Updike's trick, is to make us feel we are getting that. Maybe we are getting that in prose like that. So I thank you and hope you have a good rest of the weekend, and I will see you in a few days in a new year of 2025. Hopefully we will meet again. And subscribe to our show if you can, and tell others. And I'd like to have some guests that are experts on Updike in the future. I'm working on that. We'll see. Thank you.